Which of these are Korean, Japanese, or Chinese? Can you tell the difference? Feel free to make your guesses because I'll be revealing the answers in a minute. Growing up, I never actually studied traditional Korean furniture. They were more so just around every now and then, and I could kind of recognize some of the shapes. But after making this Korean-inspired coffee table in 2023 and interviewing several woodworkers and artists in Korea, I started to do a little bit of digging and research of my own. What is traditional Korean furniture? What makes it distinctly Korean? And are there any woodworking techniques that are specifically Korean? I did my absolute best to find out the answers to those questions and was also lucky enough to get some help from Yves Pintaud, the owner of the website KoreanAntiqueFurniture.com. Yves is someone who has collected lots of antique Asian furniture pieces over the years, and not only has he found a particular interest in Korean furniture, he also had the opportunity to compare them against furniture from other Asian countries. And without further ado, let's dive into this rabbit hole and see if we can figure out some answers. If you couldn't tell the difference between the pieces of furniture earlier, it's really not your fault, because the truth of the matter is, distinguishing which came from where can be pretty difficult to the untrained eye. And even if you're trained, it can still be difficult sometimes. And that's because all the East Asian countries have their furniture making roots from China. And each of those countries at some point in history developed their own unique style and identity. Right now, we live in a time where, especially with the influence of mass production, function and cost have become the primary motivators for the type of furniture we see in homes. Being able to produce so many different shapes and designs through machinery and deliver them all over the world has already forever changed the world of furniture. And when we look back to the past, at periods without these kinds of machines, furniture took time and required a lot of skills, tools, and techniques that all took decades and maybe even hundreds of years of innovation to develop. All of which, by the way, were most likely passed down through lifelong apprenticeships. And that's what we're essentially exploring. Where did that journey of craftsmanship take Korean furniture before modern-day machines? When we go back to some of the earliest times, and we're talking from 57 BC to 668 AD, we honestly don't have a lot of physical evidence to know exactly what kinds of furniture Koreans had or made. Most of it was probably just destroyed by time. What we do have are some small physical objects that were found in tombs like lacquerware, trinkets, books, as well as some paintings. If we examine the paintings a little bit more, we can definitely see some of the evidence of low-style tables and either chairs or benches. They all seem plain and without any decoration or design, but a consistent theme we can take note of is the concept of floor seating. This was more than likely influenced by China, who at this time was regarded as the center of all knowledge and also implemented floor seating during this period. When we move forward into the years of 1918 to 1392, Korea was beginning to gain political stability, and with that came more artistic creations and the beginnings of a Korean style. Sadly though, I'm not sure if this manifested so much into furniture yet, because again in this period, we just don't really have anything to physically examine. You can definitely see some evidence of simple and basic furniture in some paintings, but most of what I was able to find from this time period are ceramics, along with more lacquerware and smaller objects. In those same paintings though, you can still see that people were sitting on the floor, which is something we'll get back to and talk about in a minute. But even though we still see floor seating, it doesn't mean that chairs were non-existent or that they were incapable of making them, as we can see from this guy sitting in a chair in this painting, as well as the amount of detail they were able to achieve through ceramics, small boxes, and lacquerware. It just might have been that chairs and furniture were items that were more reserved for the upper class and royalty. When we move into the years of 1392 to 1897, Korea went through a kind of cultural renaissance. They were deliberately moving away from foreign influences like China and worked to establish and promote their own unique Korean identity. Interactions with China were reduced, and we also see the creation of Hangul, the Korean writing system. Neo-Confucianism also gained a lot of traction during this time. In comparison to traditional Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism incorporated philosophies around metaphysical and cosmological elements, like living in harmony with nature and the flow of the universe. It promoted ideals of simplicity, modesty, and practicality, and you could see this philosophy manifesting in their furniture design too. And before we go completely down the road of furniture, there is another aspect I think we should talk about first. These pictures are from the 18th and 19th century. With careful observation, we can see that even throughout the 17 and 1800s, Koreans were still utilizing floor seating. This was a pretty big departure from China, as by 400 AD, Chinese royalty was already beginning to use chairs. The usage of chairs slowly and gradually spread to the commoners, and by the Ming Dynasty period, which was between 1368 and 1644, chairs became the most common piece of furniture found in Chinese homes. Korean royalty did use chairs too, but it seems it was a trend that just never spread to the commoners like it did in China. And because of that, the types of furniture we see are more catered to a floor-centered life. As Dr. Lyndel King, the director at the Weisman Museum, beautifully put it, when you take away the chairs, there really isn't a whole lot left that you need. And because of that, what you're left with are mainly storage type cabinets and chests, as well as some low style tables. The era of Joseon Dynasty is actually where I'm going to be concentrating most of my observations, and before we get to them, I wanted to quickly finish out the rest of Korean furniture history to modern day. That way we can just concentrate on the juicy parts, you know? Now, once we get to the early 1900s, Korea will first go through a period of Japanese colonial rule. During this time, many traditional Korean arts, including furniture making, were suppressed. When Japanese rule ended in 1945, Korea went through a rapid industrialization period. There was the introduction of mass production as well as modern materials like plastic. With this also came the moving away from traditional woodworking and furniture into what we see today. If we think about it, it's really within those 100 years that furniture and the making of it made the biggest changes. And they're really big changes too. Up until the 1900s, Korea was actually known as a hermit kingdom, which is a term used to describe a nation that willfully walls itself off from the rest of the world. Within a single lifetime, I think it's highly probable that some or many people in Korea were able to see the entire shift from traditional woodworking and furniture making to the beginning of the mass production style that we have today. Kind of like how we today have been able to see the beginning and growth of the internet and AI. And now that we've pretty much caught up on the history of Korean furniture, let's take a step back to that cultural renaissance period, because as we all know, that's where all the cool stuff happened. A lot of the oldest Korean furniture pieces that have been preserved are actually from the Joseon Dynasty period, starting from around the 18th and 19th century. We've already noted that the kinds of furniture they made were catered to a floor-centric lifestyle, meaning a concentration towards storage-type cabinets and chests, as well as a few low-style tables. Of course, that isn't all they made, as you can see from their depictions of bows and arrows, carriages, mirror boxes, and even these cute hat boxes. But the most common type of furniture that existed during this time period was the pandaji. In your opinion, what are the most iconic pieces of traditional or antique Korean furniture?
The piece I prefer is the bandaiji. Bandaiji is called in the West the blanket chest. It's a very common piece because most of the people, depending on their status, owned a bandaiji. It was widely produced all over Korea. It's a chest which defines for me the most Korean tradition.
Pandaji typically had these hinged front panels that dropped down, and in the West, they were popularly called blanket chests. The term blanket chest actually has no relation to the meaning of the word pandaji at all. They were just called blanket chests because it was believed that people stored their blankets either inside or on top of it, and it was just one of those terms that kept spreading, and well, here we are today. Thanks, America. Pandaji, though, were more likely multifunctional and used to store pretty much anything. Another type of storage chest that was popular is the nong, sometimes called ichung nong, because ichung means 2 levels, and it's actually a defining characteristic of it, the 2 stacked units. There are other kinds of furniture pieces that were made back then too, but the third and last one that I wanted to bring up in this video is the soban. These were small tray-like tables that were typically round or rectangular in shape and mostly used as a personal dining tables or for carrying food. And the reason why I wanted to bring up the soban is because even in the earliest paintings from the tombs that I'd shown earlier, you could kind of see these tray-like tables that resembled the soban. And while that may be a bit of a stretch, because, at the time, they may not have even been called that yet, when we look at the paintings from the 18th and 19th century, you can definitely see them there. Now, if we take a second to flip through a bunch of examples of Korean furniture, one characteristic that's easy to notice is their usage of metal fittings and hinges. These were called 장석. 장석 were typically made of cast iron, copper, tin, nickel, and white and yellow brass, and had mostly a functional purpose up until the early 19th century, helping to strengthen joints and to compensate for wood movement. After the turn of the century, though, Korean craftsmen began to incorporate a more decorative touch, crafting designs like clouds, shapes, flowers, butterflies, birds, gourds, and bats. I don't know about you, but I gotta admit, this one does kind of remind me of a certain superhero we know. Even though these metal fittings were common in Korean furniture, if you take a look at the differences between the images on the left and right, you might be able to see that one group utilizes a lot more than the other. What we're looking at is a regional difference between northern and southern Korea. The ones with more metal being from the north, and the ones with less being from the south. Why, you might ask? Well, it's because of the trees and what was available to the people. The trees in the north, because of the climate, typically had less pronounced grain pattern, and because of that, the craftsmen sought to balance that sort of emptiness with metal. To the south, you'll notice much more utilization of wood grain, and this actually brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of traditional Korean furniture. Korean craftsmen paid very special attention to the overall balance of pieces, especially to wood grain. This concept of utilizing the natural wood grain and tone as a design element wasn't something really seen in furniture from China or Japan, or at least not as much. Without a doubt, this had a lot of influence from those Neo-Confucian ideals of balance and harmony with nature. And what they created out of that were designs that match a lot of the sentiment that exists in modern art today. If you take a look at this piece, you can see how it's essentially divided into two distinct sections. The top portion features laterally opening doors with wood that has been book matched from the center, and of course closed with the only circular metal fitting in the piece. On the bottom, you see 3 different levels, with the middle level potentially being the only actual door. The top and bottom portions seem to be from the same piece of lumber, first cut down the middle and rotated to create an interesting kind of balance, with the darker portions towards opposing corners and the more heavily lined portions on the other opposing corners. This of course leaves us with almost every piece being heavily lined or with pronounced wood grain. But then, to create balance, that middle door on the bottom utilized a piece of lumber with a more sparse wood grain, making this compartment kind of an opposite to the top compartment. Also, check out the square metal fitting used here as opposed to a circle one on top. If we go into even smaller detail, we can see a lot of intentionality in the way they position the grain in the frame too. But for now, let's keep moving on. This 19th century piece features Zelkova wood, which is in the same botanical family as elm. Sometimes, Zelkova is also called dragonwood because of the distinctive swirls of the grain. In this chest, you can see that utilization of book matching on the center drawer, and with this piece, we see an amazing and skillful use of tone. I want to point out how there's almost a diamond shape of darker tones surrounding the 2 warmer and brighter center doors. The 3 drawers on the bottom are all of a lighter and more subdued tone and grain, which also matches the 2 drawers at the upper 2 corners, which are also lighter but with slightly more pronounced wood grain, making them kind of opposites of each other, yet still related. When we look at the remaining face panels, we see these 2 in the center being kind of a middle ground tone, darker than the 3 at the bottom, but lighter than the one at the top, creating almost a pyramid effect. And the remaining panels on the left and right side are darker, matching each other and at the same time creating that subtle separation between all the other shapes we see throughout the piece. This piece features persimmon wood on the face panels, pear wood for the frame, paulownia sides, and brass fittings. And persimmon is known to have this kind of really pronounced wood grain pattern. What they frequently did with these swooping grain patterns was use them to kind of mimic those tall Asian mountains, and we can definitely see that when we take a look at this piece here. If we go back to the other piece though, there's almost no need of an explanation to show how they used the wood grain to balance each other and as a design element. For me, it really reminds me of an abstract painting. The wood types that were commonly used included zelkova, paulownia, persimmon, pear, and pine, which of course is a different kind of pine than the kind we're used to in the States. And if you notice in a few of the pictures I just showed, Korea does utilize multiple species of wood for a single piece. While China and Japan typically use 1 or 2 kinds of wood species per item, it wasn't uncommon for Korean craftsmen to utilize a lot more.
On one piece of furniture, Korean could use between 3 up to 5 or 7 pieces of wood. And this is unique. You don't find this in Chinese furniture. Chinese furniture are mainly made from 1 to 2. Japanese furniture are also made from 1 to 2 or 3. Korean went up to 5 or 7 on the same piece of furniture. Why? The first reason is that they will use the best wood, the most beautiful wood, which was the most expensive wood, for the front part of the furniture, because the front part of the furniture was the part which was seen and should have a very nice appeal. The sides and the back of the furniture were made from much cheaper wood. And why so many pieces is because Korean discovered that using a large number of wood could help them to prevent shrinkage of the furniture. And I discovered it myself during my years of practice between Korean, Chinese, and Japanese furniture. Chinese furniture were exploding. I mean, they could crack and you could have few millimeters. I have all Korean pieces which I purchased in the mid-80s. No movement at all. How do you explain this? Compared to a Chinese furniture of the same age, which is still cracking today?
As a woodworker, thinking about the concept of utilizing different wood species to handle wood movement is kind of mind-blowing. Even when I examine the pictures of how some of those different wood species have come together, it just doesn't make sense in my brain of how they would have been able to use different species to prevent or control wood movement. So I do have a tiny bit of skepticism about it. I think for me, I would have to take one completely apart and do some studies and tests on those specific wood species to see what was going on, but I don't think anyone would really want me to do that. So at least for now, it's one of those things I'm just gonna roll with, because I mean, how can you beat first-hand observation? Now, of course, one area that I've gotten some smack about is the topic of joinery. Honestly, people were ripping into my initial thoughts on Korean woodworking in comparison to China and Japan, and it seems that calling the joinery between these countries the same hits a tender spot for people.
Assembly or joinery technique, I will say that they are similar to those in China and in Japan. They use a lot of tenon and mortise or dovetail joinery. They don't use nails, and they used sometimes fish glue to strengthen their furniture.
Without a doubt, modern-day Japanese joinery is pretty much on a playing field of its own, super complex and extremely intricate. And without a doubt, the joinery used in temples and buildings are also pretty well known to be terrifyingly precise. But on the concept of furniture joinery, specifically from these older time periods, most of what I see from pictures and books still show that the same basic concepts were used. Mortise and tenon, dovetails, finger joints, pegged lap joints, no nails, and minimal glue. There is without a doubt a presence of high precision and elegance in the overall shape of Japanese furniture, even from as early as the 16th century and before that. But as far as specifically the joinery itself, I can't say I've seen any evidence that it was so different during these times. If we're talking about the extent of precision and detail utilized in furniture design between Japan, China, and Korea though, Korean furniture does take a step back here, and I'm pretty sure this was intentional. When we go back to the ideals of Korean culture, it wasn't complexity that they were after, rather that particular harmony and balance with nature, which in a sense is simplicity and almost minimalistic to a degree. In another way of saying it, it was never about making the absolute straightest line, but rather breathing life into what is. And when you take a second to look at multiple pieces of Korean furniture, despite there being those recurring concepts like metal hinges, certain shapes, and use cases, every piece still looks pretty different to each other. And this goes along with how the craftsmen in Korea valued and practiced a certain letting the piece be itself kind of aesthetic. Letting the wood grains and tones dictate how the piece would be built and put together. The emphasis on joinery and its construction then would naturally need to be more practical and maybe even a bit subdued, rather than interesting enough to become the star of the show, so to speak. And while everything I've noted so far are pretty much the main concepts I found on Korean furniture, there are a few more details, some of which are techniques that I think are pretty cool to take note of. And what I'll do during this portion is deliver these concepts with a slight rapid-fire approach. Number one, if you look at all the pieces of furniture that Korean craftsmen made, they were never made to be taller than the user. This goes back to that concept of a floor-based lifestyle, and there is a high possibility that there was some crossover of philosophy here, although I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what that would be. It's one of those things you can kind of feel but you don't know how to explain, you know? And if you look at the bottom of all the furniture, you'll notice feet, all of which are thought to help with keeping the furniture piece off the heated floor. And yes, Koreans developed a heated floor system which is completely genius in my opinion, and I don't know why the rest of the world never adopted this. That though is a topic for another day. Number two, there was a difference between the furniture made for men and women. Furniture for women were more bright and ornate, while the men's were typically more neutral, dark, and subdued. Number three, in the construction of designs, furniture was always made to be placed against the wall. You could see this in the way they constructed their designs, with the more expensive wood and elaborate design being used on the front, slightly cheaper wood and less designing on the sides, and even cheaper and basically non-existent designing on the back. Number four, there existed a very laborious finishing technique in Korea called ochil. By extensively processing the sap of a lacquer tree, they would then apply multiple layers and coats of it onto pieces, creating a beautiful and lustrous sheen. While this was more commonly seen on smaller pieces like boxes, it was also used from time to time on furniture. Most likely though, only for the ones made for royalty because of its time-consuming and precise process. There was also another type of lacquering that was red and slightly different than ochil called chuchil. Pieces finished with chuchil were also laborious and the outcome was more so opaque and solid. Number five, Korean craftsmen were really good with inlaying. Inlaying wasn't so heavily used in furniture and mostly for smaller objects, but still you could find this technique on furniture enough to not count it out. All kinds of materials were used for this. Wood, metals like brass, silver and gold, bone and ivory, animal skins, and even tortoise shells. But the most prized was a mother of pearl inlay, also known as najeon. This method, like many other methods, was first passed down from China sometime between 57 BC and 935 AD. Between then and 1279 though, the technique was declining in popularity in China, whereas in Korea, it was gaining. Once we reached Korea's cultural renaissance period, inlaying along with ochil continued to evolve and were often combined together for a beautiful effect, which was also called najeonchilgi. Number six, the variety of metal fittings is insane and would take me forever to go over all the kinds they made. It is a pretty cool topic on its own though, so if you want to learn more specifically about metal fittings, I'll also include a link in the description with Yves Pintaud's article about them. So just to take a sort of a sidestep away from all this talk about traditional furniture and woodworking, I wanted to ask you all a question. What would it look like if we combined some of these concepts into a modern day creation? Well, one example might look a little something like this. This is an electric guitar made by 멋질 Lab, a duo of Lee Jung-hyung and An Sora, and they have combined the techniques of woodworking, lacquering, and pearl inlaying. I did get a chance to interview them while I was in Korea last year, so pretty soon I'll be releasing that video as well. This does segue us to think about where we are today. What is the state of Korean furniture and woodworking in the modern world? Well, the good news is that Korea has seen a bit of a resurgence in furniture making and woodworking over the past 20 to 50 years. Many talented people with unique and different perspectives have been popping up everywhere. Some seeking to preserve the traditional ways, some seeking to carve out an entirely new path, and some looking for their own unique way to blending them. With so many technological advances, I believe that the fusion of traditional concepts with modern-day aesthetics has still yet to be explored to its full potential. And while the older and traditional styles of furniture may not fit exactly with our way of living today, the ideas, sentiments, and philosophies are definitely still alive and absolutely has a place in the modern world. And now we are officially back at the beginning. What is traditional Korean furniture and woodworking? What defines it? Is it the attention to wood grain, the shapes they made, or the metal hinges? Or is it that combination of practicality and Neo-Confucian philosophy? Is there a place for joinery, inlaying, and lacquering to be a part of that definition? I believe that it's a combination of all of those things, and there's not really one aspect that could exist without the other in defining Korean woodworking. And that really speaks to the beauty of what Korean woodworking and furniture is really like. It's that really unique combination and balance of concepts that has somehow become its own identity, but one that you can sense and know is. I don't know if I can really come up with a better way of saying all that, but if you can, let me know in the comments below. And before we part ways, I just wanted to share with you this beautiful description of what Korean furniture is that was made by Wright, who was one of the biggest contributors to the largest collection of traditional Korean furniture in the United States at the Weisman Museum. This is actually from his book called Traditional Korean Furniture, and I'm not gonna try to read it because as beautiful as it is, it's written in a way that's basically a super long tongue twister for me. So please do enjoy the next few moments from, again, the late Wright. If you're wanting to watch or listen to the full interview between Yves Pintaud and I have a link in the description below for that. And if you're sticking around for the post-show hangout session, hey, that was a long ride and you rock. This video took a very long time to make, and I have got to give a big thank you to Dawn for doing a lot of the research for the subject. Special shout out also to Yves Pintaud for being so generous to do that Zoom meeting with me and going over so much information. We learned a lot about Korean furniture through his website, and if you're curious to see it, it's koreanantiquefurniture.com. He also has a Facebook group that he stays pretty active on, so you can check him out there too. The other two references that I got a lot from are the resources posted online from the Weisman Museum, as well as this book, Traditional Korean Furniture by Wright, and I'll leave a link for it in the description too. If you follow me on other social media channels, you might have noticed that we haven't been posting so much recently, and it's honestly because of this video. Making short-form content takes up a good chunk of time, and for at least a little while, we're gonna be working really hard on our YouTube content because we have a lot of videos that we're wanting to create. What we're currently aiming for is to create 2 videos a month, and we're trying for every first and third Sunday. I also wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon members. You guys are super awesome. Thank you so much for all your support, and I hope you all are ready for another Zoom chat soon. Last but not least, we are going to end today's hangout session with another tongue twister. Give it to me. Ay. Alright. Oh, you got it from ChatGPT? Okay. Saying this as fast as I can. Six sick hicks nick 6 lick bricks with picks and sticks. 6 sick hicks nick 6 clicks. 6 sick hicks nick 6 slicks. 6 slick hicks nick 6 6 slick hicks, nick, 6 slick bricks with picks and sticks. Jesus Christ, this is the hardest one. 6 sick hicks, nick, 6 slick bricks with bricks and sticks. 6 sick hicks, nick, 6 slick bricks with picks and sticks. 6 sick hicks, nick, 6 slick bricks with picks and sticks. I'm gonna do it one more time. 6 sick hicks, nick, 6 slick bricks with picks and sticks. Hey! I got it. Well, that's it for today. Stay awesome, you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video and peace out.